So my name's Joe King, and I have over 10 years of experience in the video games industry as a community manager, social media manager. I've done influencer management type gigs, customer support, done all kinds of different stuff in that time, but mainly focused on community and social. And I got started. We were talking before we started recording here. We're both from Nashville, and I was working at a percussion warehouse there in Nashville back in 2013. And I happened to see that Gearbox Software had posted on Facebook that they were looking for a new community manager. And so I kind of thought to myself, funnily enough, oh, hey, I could figure out how to do that,
Yeah.
And, it was at a point in my life where I was really trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't have any experience or had no idea what I was doing. I did have a really, really strong passion for Borderlands. For those that don't know, that's kind of the big game franchise that Gearbox is known for. So I was super passionate about that, a member of the community already, really active on the forums, things like that. And so, I sort of, I actually reached out to my brother-in-law, who is also in the industry, and, asked him if he wouldn't mind looking over my resume. So I went home that night and I kind of updated it as best I could and sent it to him. I'm kind of expecting him to come back with, feedback like, oh, I found a typo here, or I would change this phrasing there, or, whatever. And he kind of came back with this long, kind of couple paragraphs long email that was like, hey man, remember, this is a long shot for you, and so, and if you're going to have any hope of getting their attention, even vanilla Word doc is not going to cut it. You're going to have to go all out and make an impression. So that was all I needed to hear. And so I kind of went down to the craft store and I bought, like a wooden box and some paints and, a few kind of art supplies like that. And I made this, I created this, basically a loot chest, like a red loot chest from Borderlands, and, painted the box to look like that. And then I went into Photoshop and I redid my resume in red and black and with Borderlands fonts, and the Gearbox logo is kind of in there and some blood splatter and some stuff like that. And I put it all together and I kind of decoupaged the inside of this box and it just really made this whole package, And so I kind of put it all together and then I mailed it to them and gave it about a week. I just called the front desk at Gearbox and just said, hey, my name's Joe King. I sent you guys this loot chest resume last week. And the receptionist goes, hang on, that was you? And I'm like, yeah, that was me. Oh, hey, well, she was like, well, that was really cool. Yeah, that was pretty neat. Like a bunch of us have seen that and it was cool. And I was like, oh, thanks. Yeah. And so anyway, she sort of said that she would tell the HR director that I'd called, and she did. And so I think it was the next day or so, the HR director called me and we had a quick, that quick kind of first screener call. And, just to make sure that I wasn't looking to, get rich being the community manager, or that I wasn't completely insane in a bad way. So one thing kind of led to another, and they ended up flying me down for an in-person interview, which was insane. Now, I sort of expected the whole thing, of course, to kind of flame out and go to hell at any moment. But yeah, I mean, just one thing led to another. And by the end of it, I didn't end up getting that job, but they liked me enough through the in-person interviews and just my communications and stuff like that. They liked me enough that they offered me a contract role. So basically, I became it was like a community coordinator role, I guess you could say, but it really just mostly like a glorified forum admin. So I was they basically handed me the forums and said, hey, you've been posting on these, now run them. I was like, oh, okay. And so I kind of helped with the mod team, and they were really great. And but then they also gave me the job of sort of talking to the community about what kinds of forum features they'd like to see in a new forum. So they were in the process of creating a new forum for everybody. And so they wanted me to come in and help get the community's feedback on, what the community wanted to see in a new forum, what kind of features, things like that. And so we did that, and I kind of went through that whole process and did that role for about a year and a half. And then every 6 months, my contract would come up for renewal, and they would just kind of automatically renew it. So they clearly liked the work I was doing. And every time it would come up for renewal, I would sort of, hey, anything full time? Any possibilities there? No, nothing yet, but keep asking. Okay. One of the gigs that I was doing during that time was you being from Nashville, maybe familiar with the role's called a production runner, and it's basically like the bottom of the totem pole with a tour.
Yep.
So when a tour comes through town, they will arrive at the arena. We're talking big tours, of course. Like they'll arrive at the arena and they will have, usually 2 or 3 runners, depending on how big the tour is, that are doing things like literally running errands, like going to the grocery store to stock the buses, or going to drop off or pick up laundry, or drop off or pick up people at the airport. It's really just that kind of grunt work, like, hey, go here, do this. I got a gig with Fish, the band Fish, and they weren't playing a show. I think they were just in town recording or doing something. And so I was in this rehearsal space over in Nashville called SIR. When my phone rings, and it's the guy that I was working with at Gearbox, and he said, hey, can you fly to Dallas tomorrow? We think we found a way to make this work. And so I'm thinking, of course I told him, I said, yeah, absolutely. I'll be on the first flight out tomorrow, no problem. I'm in the middle of a gig. I have to find somebody to cover for me. So then I start calling all the other, runners that I know and that I've worked with, and I found somebody to cover, and it was no big deal. And ended up flying to Dallas again. And this time it was different because it wasn't like nerve-wracking, like the first time was, because I had been working with the team, at least a few people, for a year and a half at that point. And I had even done the first PAX South show with them. Gearbox did a whole big thing at the first PAX South. And so I had done that with them. I think I'd met all of the marketing team at that point in person. So it was more like going down to see friends and kind of reconnect with friends than a job interview. It was very much a formality. A few weeks later, they made me an offer and I accepted. And then probably about a month later, I had moved on to Dallas down here and was starting. And so it was crazy. It all happened there at the end. It all happened really, really fast. And the Gearbox years were amazing. Some of the best and coolest years of my working life, my adult working life, just really, really cool. Lots of moments. And in 2019, I left Gearbox and went to GameStop, and that's where I was senior social media manager there. I was able to kind of start focusing just on social. So it was cool with Gearbox. I was kind of learning a lot about everything, but stretching myself between, community and social and kind of whatever else needed to be done in that world. With GameStop, it was cool because I was just able to focus on social. So I got really good at, brand social and kind of knowing, what might work for us and what might not, and things like that. GameStop was really cool. We had some great hits too, just really popular posts that went off and that was always fun. It was a lot of fun there. It felt a lot like gambling, kind of, where we would sort of have this crazy idea. Sometimes things pop off, sometimes they don't, but it was a lot of fun. So after that, I had Tencent reach out to me, and they ended up bringing me on in 2022 as a senior community manager there. And I worked on several things there, but the 2 things that I worked on that shipped, one was a game called Synced, and then one was a game, NBA Infinite. So a competitive mobile basketball game. And that was a lot of fun to work on. Back in May, I got laid off from Tencent, unfortunately. And so since that, I've been, looking for a full-time gig, but I'm also kind of trying to build up some side hustle stuff. Doing some consulting and freelance work. I've got a couple clients on the hook that are going well, and I'm really enjoying that. I launched a podcast of my own a couple of months ago called Game Industry Job Hunt, very cleverly titled there. And basically I'm talking to recruiters and career coaches and hiring managers, and just trying to get a sense of sort of decoding the game industry job market, and sort of talking to these people to get tips and tricks for myself, and then sharing that as a podcast, help other people that are in the same boat as me.
As you're sort of in this flux, like, what is your feeling? Because you might want to move around, you have some flexibility now, but obviously the opportunity is where the opportunity is. So how do you sort of measure all of that stuff? How does all that weigh together? Like when you're thinking, oh, this opportunity might be let's say, more of a once in a lifetime opportunity for you, whereas it might not be the most comfortable situation, or it might not be the most stable of ground, as as the gaming industry goes. How do you sort of measure all of that when you're making those decisions?
So I think the short answer to that is kind of just it's just like a feeling, I guess. It's kind of a feeling you have, like when something pops up. Like I have had, as I've been looking for a full-time gig here the past several months, I have had some pop up that kind of on the surface, like you look at it and you're like, this is really, this isn't like this isn't really the title I'm going for, or this isn't quite the salary I'm going for, or whatever. But there's something about it that's drawing me to it and kind of making me not really care about that, I've had a couple of those kind of pop ups. So I think a lot of it is just sort of feel. I mean, there's sometimes you just look at something and you're like, okay, this isn't right. Moving on to the next.
Right.
For me, that's the case. I mean, I think in general, to the first part of your question, kind of where is this going? I think to best articulate that, to give context on kind of where I think we're coming from, I am one of the people that is of the school of thought that this is sort of this is a contraction from COVID, even though we're like a few years removed from that. I think during COVID, you had people at home all the time playing a lot of video games. The industry just got filled with cash, and all of a sudden, organizations and teams are wanting to hire for a lot better money, and they're wanting to scale a lot faster. And I think they just grew too fast. And they didn't really have plans for, okay, but what happens after this? I really genuinely think that a lot of leadership in the games industry just thought this was a sea change and it was just going to be this way now. It just like, oh, people, this is just how things are going to be going forward, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so I think as people started to go back to work, they're maybe not working remotely anymore. They're not at home as much. They're not playing games as much. Obviously that cash flow dwindled down a lot. And then right around that time, 2022 is where you started seeing layoffs, these sort of crazy layoffs in the games industry happening. So with that in mind, I think where we're headed is I do think that things are going to even out. I do wonder, are we going to get back to a point where everybody that was affected by these layoffs, which there are obviously tens of thousands of us, right? Are all of us going to find roles in the games industry going forward? No, of course not, because many people are going to look and they're not going to find anything. They're going to find jobs outside of the quote unquote games industry. They're going to start a business, move on to something else. Admittedly, some of those things I'm kind of thinking about too, just in the long term, starting a business. And then I think for those of us that are individuals trying to stay in the industry and find jobs in the industry, I think it's rough just because we don't really know how long that's going to take, and there's a handful of roles out there, both good and bad, depending on your opinion of said role, right? Of a given role, there are a handful of roles for a ton of really, really qualified and talented candidates, right? So, the thing that I did back in 2013 to get my start of making a thing and then mailing it to an office, that wouldn't work anymore. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because there's so much distribution of teams and remote work and things like that, like, where are you going to send something to? I mean, a lot of teams now are just fully remote. They're just distributed teams that work together in that format, and it works for them, So the rules have changed. The rules have changed a lot. And I think you really, really have to be on point and know exactly what you're doing and what value you bring, and be able to really effectively articulate that, not only in your resume and in an interview setting, but also online, just on LinkedIn, especially just being able to sort of show, on kind of a weekly basis, a few posts per week of talking about what you do or commenting on it or whatever, and kind of showing, hey, I know what I'm talking about, and so, I mean, that's kind of my approach. At least that's what I'm trying to do, is just, talk about the things that I know where appropriate, where I can, where it makes sense to, and then, do custom resumes, do your research before interviews, things like that. And that's kind of been my play.
As you have had this experience with social media as a whole and sort of as it ties to the gaming, in the gaming community and streaming and just all of these different avenues, like how has it changed from when you started? Like what is the turning point and sort of like what does the future look like as far as like social and sort of that community building and gathering and all of that different stuff that you sort of work on? Like what's the next step in that?
I think as far as next steps go, I think for community, one of the big trends that I'm seeing, and I think other people in my world are seeing too, is the idea that I think communities are going to go back to a lot of in-person type things like meetups and things like that. Networking is so super crucial, in that whole thing. And I think that you can't beat in-person networking. You really can't, as awkward as it can be sometimes, and as like it's hard. It's not always easy. It can be intimidating, but you can't beat it. You really can, as far as quality of relationship building goes. And so I foresee that being another positive this year, hopefully, that some of those communities are going to start doing more in-person things. And I think that the people that can sort of come out of their shell a little bit and take advantage of those may have some good luck in the job hunt process as well. But that's a big thing for me. And I think that it's changed. You asked also kind of how has it changed? I think that it's sort of changed, and now it's kind of maybe going back. Like if that prediction proves to be true, you used to have a lot more of that. You used to have a lot more. One thing that comes to mind is, sort of, industry events like PAX and things like that, where you would have a lot of these parties and these meetups, both given by, companies and brands, but also communities meeting up with each other, just people meeting up with each other. And so I think that obviously happened before COVID, stopped during COVID. And I think that I see that picking back up too as a part of that. But even just hyper local stuff, just meetups, networking events, community get together type things. I think we're going to see more of that. Yeah, I learned this working at Gearbox, that in-game social connection absolutely 1000% translates to the real world and to real life, and so I think we're hopefully going to see more of that coming back. So that would be really cool if we do.
What is the difference in like working with somebody like Gearbox as opposed to like something more indie? So because Gearbox is such a big company, I'm sure with like a big company like that, you can't stray too far away from the initial vision and the blueprint of sort of what they have, as opposed to like if you're with an indie company or something the same, maybe you might be able to sort of show a little bit more creativity or show a little bit more, I don't know, add something that maybe you didn't think you could add or something to that effect. Like what are the differences in like working with different sort of companies and working with, different constraints and stuff like that?
So, it's a good question. So in my experience, actually, you don't run into creative constraints as much as, what's the best way to put this? Like maybe like process or timing constraints. I haven't really run into that many instances where I wanted to do something creatively that just was not like on the table. Like, no, we can't do that. Like at GameStop, there were a lot of moments like that, just because we were more amplifying the brand. We were amplifying other brands, right? Like other brands' games. But even then, depending on the title, I was able to, for our social content, for our account, I was able to, be pretty creative. And granted, there were times where, like I said, we like to try things at GameStop, right? So there were times where we would try something and, word would get back that like, oh yeah, the vendor didn't like that very much. Like the partner didn't like that very much, but it was like, oh, okay, sorry, whatever. We won't do that again. But it was never a huge deal. But a lot of it is just really Gearbox is one of the best places that I've ever seen, let alone worked at, for that kind of thing, because just the reason that their games are so amazing is really truly because the ideas come from the team. There's no one person that's going in and dictating, this is what the world's going to look like, this is what the weapons are going to sound like, this is what the characters are going to look like. There's no one doing that. You have this really awesome team of people. When I was there, and I can tell by the work they're doing on Borderlands 4 that it's still the same philosophy. You've got all these people that are they're putting their stamp on the things they're creating. I can remember from my days, the first big game that I worked on full time at Gearbox was Battleborn. And I could tell by looking at the characters, even though I kind of knew, the story of the creation of all the characters and have been around for a lot of that, I could tell which characters had sort of been created by which artists, because they had they had the idea for this character, they had the idea for that character.
Right.
From a creative standpoint, I think that's one great thing about the industry. It's going to be like, here's what we need to do, here's the deadline, and here are any constraints that you may need to be aware of. And then from there, it would be, my responsibility along with my team. I help lead a team at Tencent. So it would be our responsibility to execute that and get that done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, I've never had an instance where there were a lot of arguments about the creativity of, or like the creative approach around something, but I have been in meetings where there were disagreements on like timing and general approach of like, oh, we should not announce this that way, or we should not announce this at that time, or we should not say this thing, on this platform. We should say it on this platform. It's less about creative disagreement and more process type, or what should we do? How should we do this type disagreements. That's been my experience.
You're a big Borderlands fan, obviously. What other games did you play? Were you playing? Do you have any sort of dream game you want to work on or anything like that?
Oh yeah, of course. So as a kid, my favorite game was Legend of Zelda, right? And that's the first game, that first original NES Legend of Zelda. Mm-hmm. That's the first game I distinctly and vividly remember losing sleep over that game. So I like games where I can collect things. So that's where I realized, looter shooters are my jam. For a long time, that was Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2. Later, of course, obviously Borderlands 3. But then, yeah, from Borderlands 2, when Destiny came out in 2014, I had heard someone say it's kind of like Borderlands, where you kill an enemy and then they drop a thing, and that's all I needed to hear. And I was like, oh, cool, all right. Yeah. And, it's about like guns and armor and weapons and stuff, and, min-maxing and build crafting. And I love the RPG elements and all that. I've always loved Call of Duty, Fallout 76. I really love the Fallout series.
I'm sure you're going to be ready to play the new Borderlands when that comes out.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I remember the excitement around Borderlands 3 in 2018, right around 2018, working in community. I would post just anything from the Gearbox accounts or one of the publishing accounts that I was running, and the response more times than not was, don't care, Borderlands 3, shut up, Borderlands 3. All people wanted was Borderlands 3, and it was funny. Just there was nothing we could say at the time. It wasn't time for that yet. By the time it released, I was gone. I left in January of 2019, and the game released in September. But I went to the launch party, celebrating with friends there, that with this thing that everybody had worked so hard on, and it was really great. Borderlands 3 holds a special place in my heart. Borderlands 3 changed the way that I view the Borderlands series. But I mean, how could that not happen? How could that not, like, even just working at Gearbox, coming from being a Borderlands fan and player, I mean, how could it not change it? So I guess I kind of knew going in that was going to happen, and I was okay with that, and it turned out fine. The things that they did between Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3 were pretty exciting and pretty amazing, and so I'm very, very stoked to see what they've gone to between 3 and 4, because visually 4 is absolutely everything that I would have expected, from the trailer that I've seen. So I'm pretty excited for everybody down there. I know what they're going through. They're all pretty hyped, and they have good reason to be.
What is sort of next for you as far as in the immediate? Like, do you just want to just do the whole freelance and sort of work with the different, teams that you're working with now, different people you're working with now? Like, do you desire to work with like somebody like Gearbox again? Like, what is the next steps that you want to take? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's good questions. I've got a couple of irons in the fire still with some companies in the industry that I'm really excited about. So no, I 100% am looking to remain in the industry and find something full time, and then kind of go forward. In that case, I would keep my podcast going, because I still think there's a lot of value there. Even if I found a job, and I'm no longer on the hunt, quote unquote, as I like to say. I still think I'm having fun doing it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a good networking device.
Yep.
Let's be honest, the thing about networking is you want to do it when you don't need it, like you want to
Yeah.
be networking when you don't need something from somebody, because
Mm-hmm.
that's the literal worst time to be networking.
Yep.
Although you
Yep.
you should still be doing it. You should be doing it all the time, whether you need it
Yep.
or not. I think
Mm-hmm.
consulting is probably that's probably the closest that I would ever come to, like starting like I'm not the type that's going to start like a game studio or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really, I don't really know anything about that. And if I had some, I mean, I have some friends that are, kind of scattered about the industry that are probably brilliant at that kind of thing. And if
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity came to support them in ways that I know how to support, that I would absolutely jump at. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I think that's probably it. Is, right now it's kind of just take it one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I really would love it if a couple of, one of these opportunities that I have in the hopper were to work out. That'd be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then from there it's just kind of finding out, hey, how can I fill the off time most effectively?
Sign off if people want to reach out to you, if you want people to find you.
The platform that I'm most active on these days is LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. Just search Joe King, JoeKing. I'm there. And then the podcast is called Game Industry Job Hunt. So if you're looking for a job in the games industry, you want to figure out how to get in the games industry. We talk a lot about getting your foot in the door, being entry level, things like that. So it really is for all experience levels, whether you're a grizzled vet like me or you're you're kind of just getting started and you're nice
Yeah.
and shiny and green. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and then I've got a LinkedIn page for it as well. That if people find me on LinkedIn, they can find the podcast on LinkedIn as well.